Thank you for joining us. We are glad that you are here this afternoon for the first installment, actually, this semester of the Turbeville Speaker Series, Wellbeing Across Species, a Biopsychosocial Approach to Understanding Equine-Assisted Services. But before we get to the main attraction, I want to tell you a couple of things. First of all, start by acknowledging where we are at the University of Arizona. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. The university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time or don't know much about us, I want to tell you a little bit about the Francis McClelland Institute. I'm Melissa Barnett. I'm the director of the Francis McClelland Institute, and our goal is to work collaboratively to support building resilient communities where children, youth, and families have opportunities to thrive. And we do this by supporting innovative research, like what you're going to hear about today, educating the next generation of engaged scholars and leaders, many of whom are sitting around the table with us today, sharing research findings with practitioners in the community, and actively partnering with community organizations. All of the work that we do is to honor the legacy of Francis McClelland, who was a generous and boundary-breaking business leader and philanthropist. She understood, lived, and facilitated resilience in the lives of children and families. And she was a strong advocate for children, youth, and families, especially those experiencing marginalization. And she believed in the power of research to bring solutions to improve society. We are also very thankful to another distinguished alum, Pam Turbeville, who's made this speaker series possible. And so I will say before I turn you over today, I hope that you return and visit us in March for the next two installations of this speaker series. And of course, I hope you go to our website, follow us on social media, and do all of those things to join our community. Now, without further ado, I will introduce our speaker, and we're gonna, while I am talking, we're gonna do a quick change of computer screens here. We are very pleased to have Dr. Nicole Lorig join us today. She's a research associate in the College of Veterinary Medicine here at the University of Arizona. She conducts research in the human-animal bond and behavioral research across years laboratories. Her research investigates how interactions with animals, including pets and animals involved in animal-assisted interventions, influence human and animal well-being across contexts. She earned her PhD in animal sciences from The Ohio State University, where she explored equine-assisted services from the perspectives of both human and equine participants. Dr. Lorig's work emphasizes interdisciplinary, ethically grounded approaches to advancing evidence-based animal-assisted practices across species. So thank you so much for joining us today. And if you do have questions, Dr. Lorig has kindly said if they are kind of immediate pressing questions, go ahead and raise your hand. And otherwise, we will save time at the end for a discussion. And if you're online, go ahead and put your questions in chat.
Okay, thank you so much. Super quick technical question. Is the video on? Is it able to see?
It is following the speaker.
Love it. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Like Melissa introduced, I'm Dr. Nicole Lorig. I'm very excited to share some new perspectives on equine-assisted services. If you don't know what that is, I'm very excited to share. This is a talk related to some of the work that I conducted during my doctorate at The Ohio State University. So I gave them a shout out on screen, but I am currently here working in human-animal interactions in the College of Veterinary Medicine. So without further ado, I'd like to begin my talk with a little story. So this is this. Oh, go ahead.
Hey, to interrupt. Is there a way to hide the?
Yeah, can you minimize the
chat
Yeah.
or the Zoom thing? Because I can't see
your slides? Yeah,
Tyler.
or just move it on down.
Yeah, can you just
Minimize this, I suppose.
Yeah, you can go to more and then you can hide control bar. Maybe you can't see that.
I go to, yeah.
See a little more.
It's because it's on.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
There we go. Hi.
Yeah, hide floating meeting controls.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you, actually, for
Thanks.
acknowledging that. Okay. So before we dive in, I want to share a little story. And this is the story about April and Brutus, an equine-assisted services or EAS success story. So to set the scene, April was very excited for her first trip to the barn to spend some time with horses. But when she arrived, when she arrived,
Dun, dun, dun,
When she arrived, she realized that she was actually terrified of horses. So she still wanted to give it a try, and she decided to interact with a mini donkey named Brutus. So April and Brutus went into a space together, and what April noticed was that Brutus spent the entire duration of the 30-minute interaction pacing along the fence line and braying, calling what we assume, calling to his buddies over on the other side of the farm. April expressed to me at the end of the interaction that she was disappointed with how it went. But this was only her first interaction, so she did decide to come back. And by the end of the fourth interaction, this is what we saw. Instead of braying along the fence line, Brutus spent most of his time cuddled up with April, snuggling into her, and April spent the time, instead of being nervous and standing stiffly, she lowered herself to the ground, and she was able to be close to and hug Brutus right back. April expressed to me that she would love to come back to the barn anytime, and that there was something magical about this experience. So I want to tell you a little bit about what EAS, or Equine-Assisted Services, is. Equine-Assisted Services is a broad umbrella term that we use to describe all the ways that people, or that we include horses or other members of the equine species in interactions that benefit people. And this has three kind of broad categories within it. So the first is therapy, and this includes any specific therapeutic interaction, meaning there's a licensed professional involved in the interaction and they're working towards therapeutic goals. So this can be psychotherapy as a potential alternative to talk therapy, or something more physical like physical therapy or speech language pathology. Another branch is learning, and this is incorporating horses into non-therapeutic with a licensed health professional. So these don't require a licensed health professional, but it promotes personal growth or team building or anything that is helpful to the individual. And then the last is horsemanship. So this is what you might typically think about when you think about equine-assisted services or therapy. This is teaching individuals skills related to horsemanship that are traditional for most audiences. So like lessons, riding, groundwork, things like that. Can also be adaptive. So adaptive carriage riding, adaptive riding, things like that. So it's teaching just foundational horsemanship skills to audiences that may require adaptive education. So, equine-assisted services has shown in research to benefit a variety of populations. We hear about stories like April and Brutus all the time, and research continues to grow in this area. We've seen biological benefits, meaning decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, increased heart rate variability, so on and so forth. We've seen some psychological benefits, so decreased anxiety, decreased depression, decreased trauma symptoms, and then some social benefits as well, so increased trust, increased social awareness, increased impulse control, and the list has gone on and on. A couple of quick examples of some research done. Children with cerebral palsy have shown to have increased gross motor function in response to equine-assisted services. And this is in response to a particular type of equine-assisted services called hippotherapy, which is doing physical therapy on horseback or utilizing the movement of the horse to promote increased gross motor function. And through this meta-analysis of a variety of studies, they did see an overall improvement in gross motor function. Another example is individuals on the autism spectrum. So 1 in 31 children in the US are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And we have seen another meta-analysis here is that individuals on the autism spectrum have improved social functioning in response to both mounted and ground-based equine-assisted interventions. And another last example here is a common population that participates in equine-assisted services, which is military veterans, who have shown to have decreased symptoms of PTSD in response to participation in, again, both mounted and ground-based interactions. And so I've told you a lot about these benefits, right? So you're probably like, well, if it's so great, why the heck are you studying it? Why are you even here? And that's because evidence, even though we have seen all these benefits, we have also seen evidence that's very mixed. As a few examples, one study recently found that there was no significant changes in the client's heart rate variability, or cortisol levels. Cortisol is a measure of stress, usually. So no changes in those in response to ground-based equine-assisted services. As far as gross motor function, we saw another recent study showing no difference when we compared gross motor function in hippotherapy to physical therapy without equine-assisted services. As far as anxiety, another recent study, no change compared to those participating in only cognitive behavioral therapy. And social functioning, again, no change. And so I'm telling you this not necessarily to say that equine-assisted services doesn't work, but what I want to relate to you is that we really haven't measured it correctly yet. Or perhaps there's another way that we need to be looking at it. Additionally, I've told you a lot about the people involved in these interactions, but I haven't said a single thing about the horses. And that's because there are very limited studies available to tell us what is going on with the horse during this interaction. In fact, of those limited studies that are available, evidence is still really mixed or inconclusive more often than not. So what we see is measures of cortisol, we don't see any changes. Measures of oxytocin, no changes. Measures of some behavioral indicators of well-being, no changes or very minimal changes. And so we really don't understand what's going on with the horse in these interactions. And additionally, a lot of researchers don't even consider the horse in these interactions. But I included this little diagram here because I always like to mention that in the 5 domains model of animal welfare by Meller and colleagues 2020 is a way to conceptualize the well-being of an animal that says that different facets of an animal's day-to-day or their environment and their experiences all influence the animal's mental state. And if we look at this, one of the components of it is behavioral interactions, both positive and negative. And that means that the way that horses are interacting with people during equine-assisted services should have some influence on how they're doing. So we know that there's an impact, we just don't really know what it is. So I would like to propose a shift in perspective. It's clear that the lens that we've viewed equine-assisted services through to date is kind of oversimplifying a complex and dynamic interaction. We've focused on whether equine-assisted services works, but not necessarily the how, the why, the when, or for whom it's working. And without clear understanding of this, it's very difficult for us to actually do anything with the beneficial or magical findings that we're seeing, because we can't put them into practice if we don't know when they're going to work. So instead of asking, again, does it work? We need to start asking how, why, when, and for whom. So potentially, we can consider looking at it as a relational biopsychosocial system. And you're going to see several of these tri-Venn diagrams in this presentation. As I was going through, I realized that I love them, so this is the first. But if we approach it by looking at the human, the horse, and the environment, and in terms of not just the physical environment, but the program structure, the activities, what we're looking at during it, and how these all work together to create whatever's happening between the human and the horse, that might help us to better move the field forward and understand when we're seeing benefits and why. So a little explanation of this. Looking at it as a relational system, this is a framework that focuses on the interconnectedness and components, or I'm sorry, the functions between components, not just the individual components themselves. Looking at this from a biopsychosocial functioning approach, so again, told you you'd see another one. This is a framework that was originally proposed in the late 70s that suggests that health is not biological, psychological, or social. It's not these individuals. We can't look at them as individual components, but we need to look at how they interact together and how they influence each other. We are not just the sum of our parts. All of our parts work together. And so bringing this into an equine-assisted services like can hopefully help us to understand a little bit more about what's going on. And then lastly, it's important that we look at the dynamics between the individuals. So I want to give a very brief overview of why we include horses in equine-assisted services and what human-horse interactions look like. And I always overtalk on this, so I'm just going to try to do this very quickly. Horses are prey species, and what that means is that they are hunted in the wild over the course of evolution. They were hunted, so they adapted and they evolved to be very good at being perceptive of what's going on in their surroundings so that they can escape any danger that they might perceive. So they're very, very highly perceptive to any shifts or changes, both physically or say vibe or emotionally in the environment. They're also herd animals, and what that means is that they have a very complex and important social structure. They rely heavily on one another in the wild, and even our domesticated horses today rely heavily on input from their conspecifics to understand if there might be danger around. And now, today, domesticated species also can rely on us a little bit to help get some of that input. There's safety in numbers, and that's why horses evolved to be herd animals. They kind of along the same note, they have a dominance hierarchy. And what that means is that they rely on a leader in the herd. So usually this is an adult female who they look to see if there's any danger. If she's not reacting to something, then the rest of them can kind of relax. Because they have this dominance hierarchy and they're very social, that's helpful for us. This is a flexible social system. It's not always concrete or unmoving. There's not always just one sole leader that can shift, and we can be kind of incorporated into their social structure, which is really helpful for equine-assisted services. And lastly, an important factor of why we incorporate horses is that horses have kind of a social status. We think of horses as majestic and powerful, and we see them in movies and books and paintings. They're considered something of a powerful being. And so in some populations, particularly those like military veterans who are used to having kind of being powerful or being a powerful source in any room, when they are able to work with a creature that is so big, powerful, and has this status, that has anecdotally shown to be something that is helpful for their personal growth. So all of these factors play into the human-horse dynamic. And so if we think about all of those things that I talked about, the relational dynamics, the cross-species dynamics, the biopsychosocial approach, this can help us to hopefully see what's going on again. And so that brings me to tell you a little bit about my study that I conducted at Ohio State. I'm going to tell you about it, and I want you to be thinking as we're going through what cross-species dynamics are we able to capture with this study. And yeah, whatever questions you have along the way, I want to have a conversation about it when we're done. So I'm going to dive in. We had participants come to the farm. They were selected, or they selected a horse when they got there, and they were participating with the same horse in four structured sessions for 30 minutes once weekly. Those sessions were structured exactly the same for each participant. So we had an introduction session where they went into a space with the animal. There was no lead rope or anything like that. They were just in an open space. They had the freedom to move or do with that space and time however they liked. They were given a grooming bucket, and in that grooming bucket there were brushes and things, but they were given it and told that they could use their time however they liked. So they didn't have to use the tools they were given. The second session was focused on communication. So they went into the same space with the animal as they had last time. They were given the same tools, but then they were told to think about how communication was taking place in the space. So how the horse was communicating with them, how they were communicating with the animal. The third session, we introduced a halter and a lead rope, and this was focused on leadership. So we did have the grooming bucket still in place. It was still the same exact environment, but we introduced that halter and lead rope, and we showed them how to use it, but we did not put it on the animal for them, and we didn't interact with or touch the horse in the process. So it was only them. If they wanted to use it or try to use it, they were free to do that. And then the fourth session was thinking about challenges. So in addition to the grooming bucket and the halter and lead rope, we introduced in the space a comb and some poles. And we said, you're welcome to lead the animal around the cones or over the poles in whatever way felt best for them. But we also shared with them that since this was their last session, they were able to interact in whatever way they chose. Okay, so we had multiple assessments. We did take pre and post intervention assessments for the human participants. And this was allowing us to have kind of a longitudinal data assessment to capture what was going on in response to the 4-week interaction. So for this, we had pre-session 1 measures of PTSD symptoms and quality of life, and then post-session 4 measures of exactly the same thing. In addition to those kind of overall measures, we wanted to take measures before, during, and after each session so that we could hopefully capture some of the variability in what was going on kind of moment to moment or session to session with these individuals. But in addition to taking these measures from the human, we also wanted to take parallel assessments of the animal or the equine. So before and after each session, we did assess momentary anxiety via the STAI-6. Unfortunately, we could not ask the horse to complete the survey, so we couldn't do that for them, but we did take saliva samples from both the human and the horse before and after each session, and that was via passive drool. We looked at those saliva samples for oxytocin, which is, it's considered the love hormone. I could talk about it more at the end of this if we'd like to. So it's considered potentially a positive biomarker. And we took a measure of 4 pro-inflammatory cytokines, TNF-alpha, IL-1 beta, IL-6, and IL-8, which have shown to be associated with psychosocial stress in humans. Never measured before in animals in this context, but we wanted to measure it on both human and horse. Then during the session, we collected heart rate data on both the human and the horse. They both wore a Polar H10 chest strap, and then we also recorded all of the interactions for behavioral data to look at not only human behavior and horse behavior, but the interaction as well. So, starting with the human, we did have 36 participants that completed all 4 of their sessions. We, of course, started off with more than 36 participants, but not all of them made it through the 4th. sessions. So the data that I'll be presenting is on those 36. They were mostly female, between the ages of 36 and 45. They were mostly white, and they all, or they had like about a little horse experience. So when we asked them if they had ever interacted with a horse before, that's what I mean by that. They were pretty much novices in their horse experience. So a little bit of a heterogeneous sample here. However, as a note, really quickly, I've obviously collected a lot of data, so I'm not going to be able to show you all of the things that I collected, but I am just going to highlight a few different pieces of what we saw. So in humans, we saw that salivary oxytocin did not change either within or across sessions. However, we saw that salivary IL-8 decreased across sessions. I am so sorry. It was actually increased in sessions. Typo there, I apologize. So we saw salivary IL-8 increase within sessions, but none of the other pro-inflammatory cytokines showed any changes. And what's interesting about IL-8 is that it's a little different from the other ones that we measured. It's considered a chemokine, which means it acts as a messenger to signal an immune response. And so in some ways you can think about it as something that's faster acting compared to the others. And it's possible that we may have seen a change in this one and not the others due to its faster acting nature. And if we had potentially had a longer session, we may have been able to see changes, but we don't know that for sure. Okay, and then on the psychological side, we did see that momentary anxiety decreased on average of 27% within each session in just that 30 minutes of interaction with the horse. Okay, moving on to the horses. So we had 10 American quarter horses that were selected to participate in sessions. And they did participate kind of in varying amounts within these sessions. So some horses were selected to participate more often than others, and we gave participants the choice of who they wanted to interact with. Okay, so this is looking at horse responses to populations of individuals. In our individuals, I told you that we measured some trauma symptoms. And so when we think about how the horses responded to interacting with individuals with PTSD only, TBI or traumatic brain injury history only, comorbid PTSD, TBI history, or no trauma history, what we found was that horses that interacted with those with comorbid PTSD, TBI, showed a significantly increased oxytocin response on average within sessions compared to all other groups. Along the same lines, in terms of their behavior, horses spent a significantly larger amount of time in these sessions interacting with people in that comorbid group by just standing. And when I say standing, what I mean is they're not spending the time eating grass, they're not actively walking around, they're not actively touching the individual, but they are unmoving. So I thought that was really interesting. When we think about an aspect of the interaction, what we found was that horses displayed more acceptance behavior on average compared to avoidance behavior. When I say acceptance behavior, what I mean is that they're not creating more distance between themselves and the human in response to initiated interaction or in response to proximity. And when I say distance, I mean either their head movement or their body movement. And so we're seeing more acceptance behavior than avoidance behavior across all of the sessions. And then the last kind of interaction dynamic that I have is that the people spent 84% of each session touching the animal. And this might not be terribly surprising when you interact with a dog or a cat or a different animal, or if any of you have ever spent time in a space with a horse. Usually our first instinct is to pet them. And that's a way that we interact. But I think it's important to note that that is something that happened most of the time during these interactions. Now I've gone through just a few preliminary findings for this, a few different facets of the study that we've done so far. We've talked about human patterns, we've talked about horse patterns, and a little bit of their interaction, but we haven't really talked about kind of this program structure and environmental piece of this. So I share this image because this is the space that participants were interacting with horses in. So it was an open paddock. It had a shelter in case it rained, though usually if it was raining in sessions, they didn't go in it. They just wanted to leave the space, understandably. But it was always the same, and it always had grass. And that is something that we need to explore further, because we didn't have any differences in the interaction space. And we did see that horses spent a lot of their time eating. So we do wonder how it might have been different if the space did not have access to grass. Another consideration and potential limitation here for comparison purposes is that we did give the participants a lot of freedoms in this study. We gave them freedom to select the horse that they wanted to interact with. We gave them freedom to choose how they wanted to interact with the animal. And if they wanted to use the grooming tools, the lead line, those types of things, which I think are important aspects of equine-assisted services, because that is typical in a space, and it's an important thing to consider when we think about what's going on between individuals, not necessarily across individuals. But in this particular study, it's difficult for us to compare that across individual space. And so that would be a future direction, is to look more at the choice that they make in interacting. Okay. And sorry, one last thing is, how might our findings have been different if we had structured the sessions differently? We did them all the same on purpose, and they were all ground-based, but a lot of equine-assisted services are mounted, are riding-based, and it's possible that we could have seen differences between the sessions, given that they changed a little bit each time. So if we had had them consistent, so always just a grooming bucket, how might interactions or choices have been different? So where do we go from here? Future studies need to explore differences in environments, differences in program design, explore autonomy in these sessions, so the freedom to make choices and what those freedoms look like and how they impact the potential benefits that we're seeing, and human-horse pairings. We know that horses, just like humans, all have their own individuality and their own personalities, and these certainly play a role in what we're seeing unfold between the interactions. And so looking at how we might pair participants with horses better in an application setting is something we definitely need to see more. And lastly, stronger, more rigorous methodology and more nuanced outcome measures. So I want to return to our friends, Brutus and April here. There really is something about equine-assisted services that is what I like to think of as magic, but we really know that it's not. At the end of the day, we understand that there's something going on between these two, and there was a shift that happened from that very first session to the very last session. We know that there was posture changes going on between Brutus and April. April got closer to the ground. Brutus moved closer to her. Was that in response to the shift in posture? I would think so, but we don't know specifically. Different days, more acclimation to the environment potentially for both of them. So something is going on between them that's allowing this shift to happen. So the magic is what's unfolding between them, not what the horse, or in this case Brutus, is doing for April. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much for listening. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
So this is a question that I've asked myself for years, which is, what is it about interacting with a horse as opposed to another large domesticated mammal? Could be a cow, could be, whatever, a camel,
Llama.
yeah, could be a reindeer, any other domesticate, right? What is, and no one, I haven't gotten a good answer, let me put it that way, right? So do you think, what makes the horse special? Do you think that it might be a better partner, so to speak, in terms of having these salutary effects, whatever they might turn out to be?
Yeah, I love this question. And I can't say that my answer is going to be magically better than any of the other ones we've gotten, but there is speculation that some of our other domesticated farm animal species, like cattle, for example, they are prey animals, but they don't respond to danger in the same way that horses do, where cattle might be more willing to do fight more than flight. They're not fast like horses. They didn't evolve to be fast. So their perception of their environment is different. Horses have more ability to perceive in more detail, and they are more flighty. So I would think, and again, this is a little bit of speculation, but I think they're more perceptive, which helps build that connectedness in equine-assisted services. And another aspect of that perception that I didn't really talk about is because they're so perceptive of their environment, they're able to detect shifts in the human that they're interacting with. So not just movement, but heart rate shifts, posture shifts, anything that might signal danger. And they say that horses act like a mirror to them, to the person, because if there's a shift in the person that the person doesn't even notice themselves, the horse is going to respond to it and then might perceive danger or reflect that anxiety back. And so the human needs to learn then to regulate themselves in those interactions. And so in that way, because of that ability to respond quickly, I think that's something that makes horses a little different than some of our other species. And we don't really take camels to war or things like that. So I think it's okay, fair. I don't know about
In North Africa,
Oh, I do.
I guess that's fair. But yeah, I think there's a status difference, and I think there's a response time difference.
Mhm.
Hopefully that answers it.
Mhm. Yes. Oh. I wanted to add a little more complication to your story. Oh, sorry. Did you have?
person, but
When you're finished.
Sure. Yeah, it'll be short. Another complication that I see in these interactions, I am glad you had your Venn diagram, loved Venn diagrams too. So add the therapist and or horse handler in that interaction, because the horse around a handler or a therapist that they know well is different from a different handler, and that adds more complication.
It really does. I'm so glad you brought that up, because you're right. That was a limitation in the study too. I knew the horses that we were working with very well. What I didn't share is that I tried to stay as far away from them in the interaction as possible so that I didn't interfere, but horses are still able to sense that we're there. And if they're having anxiety about the person that they're with, they did sometimes come over, and so that's a tricky part of it. That's something we need to explore more.
Sorry, adding more complication.
No, that's why we're studying it. So, did you have a question?
Yeah, personally, like, how do you feel horses got their status in?
Wow, never had that question before. I guess I don't fully know. I think it comes from their domestication process. We selected them for transportation, so stronger backs and more mobility and more sturdiness. And so I think maybe because we were selecting them for use, like partnership and use, not food, it could have come from like a perception that we have of them in that sense. I don't know if I have any other example than that, except that I don't know. I think maybe it's social, maybe not. You guys can help me on this, but when I hang out with a horse, it does feel different than hanging out with a cow or a pig. Like it just feels different. So would you guys agree?
Yeah.
There's something about it. I don't know. Maybe it's just because like it's a preconceived notion. Yeah,
Is there intelligence differences?
I think so. I don't know that much about cows. I keep bringing them up, but I should know them.
Oh, yeah.
I think so. I guess I can't say for sure. That's a good question.
I'm curious what differences you think you would see if you did remove the grass or the feeding areas. Would you see more positive or accepting observations, or I don't know.
You could do that study here. Got it.
It's true. It's true. This
Plenty
is
of dirt
Ohio.
for you.
So grass. I think the humans might have perceived it differently because a lot of the participants that I had, when they were done with the session, we were walking them back. They were always like, he didn't care about me. He just wanted to eat grass the whole time. And while I know that that's not necessarily the case, even though they're eating, they're not like unaware of you or not caring. That's just what they do. But the people perceived it differently. And so their responses might have been different. They might have been, if the horse was like not eating grass and paying more attention to them in whatever capacity that was, they might have perceived it more positively. But I don't know. I think that's something we really need to explore. As we were going through, I was like, stop eating grass. So yeah, that's a follow-up question that I had for sure. Yeah.
You had mentioned earlier, this goes into when you were saying horses can hear emotion. You mentioned earlier that when they were with participants with PTSD, that they were just standstill. Can you go further into that?
Yeah, I mean, these are preliminary findings, so I'm not, we need to explore that further. But yeah, so evidence has suggested that those with comorbid PTSD and TBI have significantly altered chemical brain functioning, I guess. We see in PTSD and shifts in brain structure, we see at TBI shifts in brain structure, but we see that compounded in some ways with the comorbid group. And so with that, some of their immune markers in the brain, and I believe systematically are a little shifted, and that's why we measured the pro-inflammatory cytokines, because those are increased in those with trauma histories. So whether their standing behavior was, I don't think we can conclude whether it was positive or negative. For me, it feels at least different. If they're not choosing to eat, they're not choosing to walk away, but to just be. It's possible that that was reflecting what the people were doing in the space, or the energy that was there, so to speak, whatever's going on in the space. But that is something that we need to explore further, is like more of in that particular population in this study, what else is happening, right? Yeah, good question.
I don't know if you touched on this already, but was there like an instance where someone was very frightened around a horse and it caused the horse to like act very dangerously?
Oh, that was one of my favorite stories. I usually share this in.
Actually repeat the question.
Absolutely, sorry.
Thanks.
Yes. So the question was there an instance during this that a person was very frightened of the horse and it caused the horse to act dangerously in the session? So the answer is yes. In one of the sessions, we did see a participant who was a novice working with horses. She didn't, she had very little horse experience coming in. When we got to the third session, the first and second session, you could tell her body language was stiff. She seemed uncomfortable. And by that, I mean stiff, kind of hesitated movements toward the animal. When she pet, it was a little bit like robotic or a little awkward in movement. So we got to the third session, which is when we introduced the halter and lead into the space. The participant really wanted, or was, I shouldn't say wanted, I don't know, but was portraying to us through conversation with us, the facilitators, I guess, that she was fine. She was happy. She was having a great time, but her body language was very contradictory to that. It seemed like when we got to that session, halter and lead rope, she wanted to portray this sense of confidence. And so she got the halter on the horse and the lead rope, and she was moving the horse around the space, but the horse didn't want to move, and the horse wanted to eat grass. But she kept trying to pull the horse like away. Should also note that it was a pretty windy day. So horses on a windy day tend to be a little more spooky than on a non-windy day because there's a lot of movement happening. They're not sure. They can't sense danger as well. And so combination of all of these things, the tense body language, I don't want to say fake confidence, but like the faux confidence or the portrayal of confidence, caused the horse to whip around and give a warning kick to the participant. So she was very intentional not to kick the participant, but it was a sign, it was a signal saying, hey, I really don't like what's going on here. Please stop trying to pull me. And so I stopped the session. I approached the participant, I got the lead rope, and I said, and this is very typical in Equine-Assisted services, you say, what happened there? Because we don't want to lead them or worry them or anything. We don't want to lead them to any conclusions. And the participant told me that the horse was afraid of something. So there was, I don't know if there was a connection between what her behavior was and what the animal's behavior was. I can't say for sure, but yeah, that did happen. And so we kind of took it easy, ended the session early, but the participant did come back for the next session. And yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Very interesting session. I'm wondering about like accessibility to horses. Equine therapy seems to be, it's not very accessible for a lot of folks. Like we have a few great, wonderful places in Tucson that offer this type of therapy and assistance, but not accessible on a broad scale. And I'm wondering, because it's not my area, I'm like, what are the links with like therapy dogs, which might be more accessible than equine? Are there similar findings for things like anxiety and
I love this question. You're right. It's not very accessible. A lot of that it has to do with the cost of maintaining horses in general. They're very expensive, and the lack of insurance availability for these types of services. This is why it's very important to me that we move the field forward towards understanding for whom and under what circumstances, because I want it to be available for people more readily. As far as comparison to canine-assisted services, this is actually a study we're working on right now. There are some limited findings available, but I can't draw any conclusions for sure. I will say, from kind of a more broad scale perspective, dogs and horses are very different, and interactions with them are very different. Horses, like I was describing, they're prey animals. They're highly perceptive. They mirror, it's said that they mirror what's going on with the person. That has to do with their nature as prey animals. Dogs are not. They're traditionally predator animals, and our relationships with dogs look very different. They're more companion-esque. They tend to be very forgiving. Instead of like mirroring what's going on, they tend to be like more supportive and comforting, as opposed to mirroring, right? Or as opposed to telling us what's going on. It just looks different. And so, yeah, we need to explore that further. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think it's going to be dependent on the person. Because certainly if a person is terrified of horses and they can't go near them, then canine assisted services is going to be much better. So yeah, but that's exactly the right direction we need to go. Yeah.
So in your experiment, you showed that like for the horses, the oxytocin increased, particularly for those who were working with people with comorbidity. Why do you think that is?
I don't know is the again the answer to that. I think that it might have to do with, so oxytocin can buffer the stress system. When we sometimes see increases in oxytocin in response to stress to buffer the system. And so it could be that maybe the human is experiencing stress in the environment. And so we're seeing kind of a reflection of that through the horse, and their oxytocin is going up. But we didn't see any changes in the people. So it could be a product of also salivary oxytocin is not the best way to measure oxytocin. So it could be a product of that. It's also a very small sample size. So I think that there's avenues that we need to look into further. Our next steps are kind of to like look more at the behavioral interactions of this specific sample, the comorbid sample here. But I don't have a 100% answer for that.
Then, I mean, yeah, and it seems like if they notice somebody more stressed, they're probably more alert.
Yes.
For increases. So
that's my thought process as well. But we did see that increased standing behavior in them as well, which is honestly an unusual behavior, especially in that environment where there's all this grass, and they could be eating. So if we're seeing this, kind of a nothing behavior and an increase in oxytocin, what's going on there?
yeah, it seems hyper alert. It's like not moving is so you can focus.
Yes. Yeah. So exactly. I think that we need to maybe think about, or we need to look back and see what facial expressions are we seeing? Ear position, head and neck position, because we didn't record those things in our initial pass. Because if it's standing alert, that's very different than standing relaxed. So, yeah.
And then in this project, you have these like 4 different activities. Can you tell us more about like why you chose to have these 4 different activities as opposed to like just having them connect in these 4 different spaces? Because I'm wondering if some of the lack of changes in these various measurements is because there's a little bit of stress added because now they have to do something new, as opposed to just having been like, okay, each time it's the same activity, and so now I'm going to go even more quickly into like rest response, like keep comfort as we develop this connection.
Yeah, we went with this approach because we wanted to find a good balance between like mitigating boredom and not promoting more stress with novelty. So you're right, introducing more and more things I think is inherently novel and potentially stressful especially for individuals who are novice horse, experienced individuals. But we also were recruiting individuals who had plenty of experience. And so finding a way to recruit people without either scaring them off or, you know, not enticing them to come do it, I think was the logic there, where it was pretty low stakes the whole time, but still building on what they learned the last time. So that's why we kind of kept we introduced the grooming bucket, and then we kept the grooming bucket, but introduced a new thought process. So it was like, okay, now you got to know your horse a little bit last time. Now think about your communication. And then, okay, now you thought a little bit more about communication. You got to know each other a little bit more. Let's add a new piece of equipment and see how that might change the interaction. So it was meant to be building on what they did last time and keeping them from being bored. And whether they were, I don't think most of them were bored. So kind of a hindsight 2020 thing, but yeah, that was a thought process.
So how long did it take for people to progress to the fourth session?
Yeah, the question was, how long did it take the people to progress to the 4th session? It was once weekly for 4 weeks in a row, so a month.
How long, or did you see any changes in biomarkers, like starting points or endpoints or deltas? Did you see any changes in horses that got picked more often?
Yes. I didn't present this data. So we did categorize them as like the horses as novice, intermediate, and like experienced or advanced. Those numbers were like 1 to 2 participant pairings, 3 to 6 participant pairings, and 7 to 9 participant pairings. So that was our max, was 9 participants. We did see that those participants who spent more time participating with participants, wow, that's a lot of times to say that, had decreases in their delta change of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So we suspect that that's a product of acclimation. They kind of know the deal. They know how the sessions are going to go, even though it's a different person. They know what's coming, and they know that space pretty well. But the Equine-Assisted Services field is trying to learn more about what we call burnout in horses involved in Equine-Assisted Services. So 9 times is actually not that much when compared to the field in practice. Horses involved in these types of interactions usually spend most of their days interacting with people, kind of in not a continuous way. They get breaks certainly, but it's usually like 4 to 5 plus interactions per day, every day. And so that, looking at the way that we broke it down, I think is really helpful to know that they are potentially acclimating. But I think it would be helpful to learn to take that a little bit further and see, okay, what if they're participating with individuals, across a 6-month span, multiple times a month? Are we still seeing this like level out, or do we maybe see like increase, decrease, and then maybe another increase or something like that? Hard to say. Yeah.
Is there like any criteria on like what horse can participate in like equine assistance? Is there,
Yeah.
like, an age group maybe, or?
Yeah. So this is a little different with horses compared to dogs. Where assistance dogs and like service dogs or assisted services dogs, I guess, they have pretty strict criteria and they have to know specific things in order to get to the level of being an assistance animal. Horses don't have the same criteria. There's no like broad scale guidelines of how we select horses for participation in equine assisted services. I think there's pros and cons to this for sure. When we select a horse to participate, we should have a good idea about the horse in terms of their personality, how they tend to react to things, and have they been at least relatively reliable interacting with people? They should have experience interacting with people, certainly. However, horses respond to the individual. And so we can't always predict exactly how they're going to interact. One of my favorite examples of, I was telling you guys about that session where we had the kind of the dangerous situation happen, but that same horse has interacted with plenty of other individuals and shows nothing like that. I mean, totally calm, still, composed, and showing lots of acceptance behaviors. And so I think it's very difficult to establish those very clear set guidelines for horses, because the idea is that they respond to the person. Not to say that we shouldn't have at least a loose criteria. So I would be in favor of that for sure. But thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what the question is in this, but I did have an equine experience once where they want that, and maybe you know this task is where you're supposed to try to pick up the horse's foot, and that is a lot harder than it sounds. But the thing that I was left with was like there's like a confident humility that the horse senses. Like you can't just be confident. Like I feel like the person who was trying to pull the horse, and you can't just be completely like a weak humility where you're giving off something that's not protective to the horse or something. Is there something to that confident humility with horses?
That is what we don't have data to back up. But yes, I will say I hear this a lot in my personal journey with equine interactions. I've learned that as well. It's quiet strength, and they respond to that with in the dominance hierarchy, that their leader, usually a older female, tends to have that sort of quiet strength. And when we show that to them, we're not faking confidence. We're feeling a little bit confident, but we understand that they should be, kind of equals, so that we're not like dominating them or whatever. I mean, there's mixed opinions on that, but basically what you're saying has absolutely been my experience as well. We just don't have the data for it. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I did not know this exists, so this was new learning for me.
Yay!
I have a question, and so did I hear you say that each time the horse and the human pairing was different, or was it the same?
The same. The same.
And why was it? In terms of like the 4 sessions and then half an hour each, is there a method to this that people like, this is the general protocol people use at all times, or like?
Great question. Yeah. So it's always the same horse pairing because we wanted to see if there was any potential relationship development. So we didn't want to throw in a new horse and a new activity every time. We wanted them to kind of get to know each other. But the 30-minute time frame is a little arbitrary, honestly. Sessions can range in literature from 30 minutes to 90 plus minutes. So that's the field is still working on understanding kind of this like dose and duration effect of equine-assisted services and any animal-assisted interventions in general. But yeah, 30 minutes, we kind of went on the lower side, more so, well, number one, to establish kind of a baseline. Like, are we seeing a difference after just 30 minutes? But also, for our sake, for, time running these sessions was lengthy, and we wanted people to be able to make time in their day for it, and we wanted to have enough time to get through all the sessions we were doing. So, yeah.
I have a follow-up, please. Yeah, thank you. I was also wondering if y'all give some kind of training on how to like interact with the horse before the interact. Like, I don't know how to interact with horses, and I would love to, but like if I get some training with a person, I don't know, who's the facilitator handler, the horse recognizes, if the acceptance of the human who's in that therapeutic space could be higher if once the facilitator is removed. They're like, oh, this person came with this person I know, sometimes I could interact in an easier way.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first part of the question, to answer that, we didn't provide them specific training. The participant is what you're referring to, right? Yeah, we didn't provide them any specific training because we wanted to see how they would interact. We wanted to understand what the interaction would look like without specific guidelines, with the exception of showing them generally how to use the grooming tools. So brush, we didn't give them a hoof pick because you know it's hard. So we didn't give them that, but just like the brushes, we showed them generally how to use them, but not on the horse. And then the lead rope and halter, I actually showed them how to use it, demonstrating on myself, so not on the horse. So I didn't like interfere with potentially how they might interact with the animal. But I think that's a really interesting point. I don't know if it would necessarily be different because the horse knows me, so there's more trust. I don't know if we can make that connection, but I think if a person were to be shown like the correct way to interact, they might have more confidence going in, and that might change the dynamic. So I think, yeah, that's a good question, but we did not.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? I love this discussion. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys.
Awesome. Mine. Any questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
joining us.